Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to TeleShadowing. We are live on YouTube. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box as we go along, and they'll be addressed. My name is Amna, and I'm a rising M1 at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. I'm honored to introduce our mentor and guest speaker, Dr. David Cockrum. Dr. Cockrum is a highly accomplished occupational and environmental medicine physician who is deeply committed to helping workers stay healthy, safe, and productive. Dr. Cockrum currently serves as Section Chief and Medical Director of Occupational and Environmental Medicine at Dartmouth Hitchcock Clinics, as well as an Assistant Professor of Medicine at the Giesel School of Medicine at Dartmouth. His clinical focus centers on work injuries, fitness for duty, early return to work strategies, and overall employee health and wellness. With board certifications in both family medicine and occupational medicine, he draws on a wealth of experience, including advanced training in aerospace medicine, to guide his patients' recovery and optimize their work performance. Throughout his career, Dr. Cockrum has embraced the philosophy that work is a major aspect of overall well-being, so he collaborates with specialists and uses up-to-date standards of practice to develop personalized care plans, ensuring that his patients understand their injuries or illnesses and the paths to returning to full function. He brings a unique perspective from his background in the Air Force and his Master of Public Health degree from the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, which equip him to handle the diverse challenges of occupational and environmental medicine. So today, Dr. Cockrum will share insights into his multifaceted career journey from his medical training to his leadership roles and offering invaluable advice for anyone exploring a future in medicine and occupational medicine. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. David Cockrum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and give me just a second. I'm going to just get my slides up here. Okay, so you should see my slides there, Introduction to Occupational Environmental Medicine. I'm going to talk to you for a little bit about the specialty, the kinds of things you could do. It's my understanding that most of the audience here are pre-health students, so college students looking at your future health careers. So we'll talk about the specialty of OEM. And see what you think about that. So we're going to talk, like I said, overview of what is OEM, what kind of work do OEM physicians do, a little bit of history of the specialty of OEM, and why myself and my peers think it's a good idea for you to consider OEM as a future career. And I'll also touch on our professional organization called ACOM. So occupational environmental medicine is, if you really sum it up in just a couple of words, it's workplace medicine. And I'll go into more detail about what all that means. It is a board certified specialty. It's underneath the American Board of Preventive Medicine. And as you can see there's actually 3 specialties that are certified by this board: OEM, aerospace, and public health and general preventive medicine. So you could specialize in any one of those 3 or more than one under the American Board of Preventive Medicine. So occupational medicine is addressing injuries and illnesses related to work. You can see a long list of really different things over there on the left. It can be any number of things from injuries, musculoskeletal, dermal injuries. It can be illnesses such as dermatitis, infections, cancers, just a whole list of things that we might see in our clinic from injured workers. And what's important to remember is we spend about 1/3 of our lives at work. So that's 1/3 of your life that is exposed to whatever risks or exposures might happen to be at your job. And so our job as OEM professionals is to understand the risks at your work site and how that impacts your health. We also address the environmental medicine. So it's the occupational, the stuff at work, but also the environment. We work with, as you can see there, lead poisoning, pollution, climate change. A lot of OEM docs, physicians will work in travel medicine, dealing with infectious diseases and travel-related issues. I myself serve on a commission from the New Hampshire State Legislature on long-term health effects of climate change. So there's a lot of opportunities to do kind of things like that are outside the normal clinical function. And so you think about the environment. I talk about 1/3 of our lives at work, but 2/3 of our lives are not at work, but we're still exposed to an environment in our homes, in our communities. And so OEM physicians try to understand risks associated with those as well as those at work. What we do is look for patterns of illness, patterns of injury, risks based on exposure, and then we talk about protective measures with the safety experts and the management, things they can do to protect the workers. The way I like to describe it is, everybody knows what the public health department is, at least conceptually. OEM is kind of like public health, but for a very defined population, that population being the workers for whom you're responsible. I work at Dartmouth Health. We have about 15,000 employees across our health system. That is my population. So in a sense, I do public health for that population. We also, when we're talking about working on looking at actual workers, we want to look at function. So if somebody's injured, it doesn't mean that they're off work until they're recovered. We want to see what can they actually do, what is their capability, what are they able to function, how are they able to function, and see if we can get them into rehab, but also give them recommendations to go back to work, but work around the injury so they don't can keep re-injuring it or produce more injuries because of that. And again, we look at environmental impacts where you live, pollution. I have done several consults with people who were concerned about environmental exposures around their home. And we talk through what the risks are, and I try to refer them to governmental agencies to seek remediation in their environment around their homes. There's also a big area of social justice. So looking at the underserved populations and looking at how workers are treated in a broader sense than just chemical exposures or injury exposure. In fact, OEM, back before it was OEM, it was just occupational medicine, was one of the primary movers in the development of workers' comp laws back in the early 1900s. And I'm going to touch on Alice Hamilton in a few minutes, who was a key to that development. So where are the kinds of places that you could work as an OEM physician? There are a lot. It's all over the place. I mean, it's not just in a clinic or in a hospital. You can be in a government agency. There's OSHA as a regulatory agency. NIOSH is a research-related agency, both government, large corporations. And I have a list of some of our peers. I'm going to talk about some of the jobs they have, and you'll see some of this. I myself I'm associated with Dartmouth College. I work at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center and the Dartmouth Health System, which is the academic system associated with Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth. So I'm kind of both of those up in the upper left corner, hospital and college university. There's medical groups practices. A lot of OEM professionals will work with the police and the fire department doing their annual physicals and other exposure risk-based protections for them. One of our prominent members of our organization is the chief medical officer for Disney. So there's a lot of really fun and interesting kind of jobs you can do too. And she has actually several other OEM physicians that work at specific parks and do specific things underneath her management, as well as all of the Disney employees. So a lot of different things, a very wide breadth of opportunities as a OEM physician. So I'll talk a little bit about myself, and this was touched on there in the introduction. As I said, I'm at Dartmouth Health, associated with Geisel School of Medicine, where I'm an assistant professor and I'm medical director of our employee health services across the Dartmouth Health system. I joined the Air Force. I came medical school at Texas Tech, and then I went to a family practice residency. And then I joined the Air Force as I finished my family practice residency, and I served for 4 years as a family doc in the Air Force. I enjoyed it, but I realized I really was more drawn to what in the military, what we call the operational side, getting associated with the actual military operations. So I got trained in flight medicine, which is just a 6-week course on the basics of aerospace and aviation medicine. And the folks who fly our airplanes in the Air Force is a very unique and special population. So I kind of learned how to work with them. And that really is a form of occupational medicine. So that's where I developed that interest. And then while I was in the Air Force, I had the privilege of going to what's called the Residency in Aerospace Medicine. We call it the RAM. The first year of that, I earned my MPH, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that and when we talk about the residency. So I earned a Master's of Public Health, and then a year of aerospace medicine focused training, and then a year of occupational environmental medicine focused training. And then I continued my career. My career after that was less in the clinic and more in management and sort of the Air Force corporate level. I commanded a hospital, was lead flight surgeon at other bases. Much more though in kind of the management realm, but I knew when I was coming up on retirement, the occupational and environmental medicine was where I wanted to be. I enjoy the challenges. I enjoy kind of the cognitive challenge of trying to figure out what's going on, what really injured this worker, and how do we prevent them from getting worse or re-injuring in another way. So that's kind of how I got to occupational medicine. I retired from the Air Force in 2017, was in Nebraska for a few years in a hospital-based, hospital-owned clinic there, and then had this opportunity at Dartmouth Health a year and a half ago. So I've been here since May of 2023. I have thoroughly enjoyed this job. So just a few of our peers in our specialty and kind of the things they do. Dr. Sharif is at Loma Linda, very much academic occupational medicine. As you can see, he runs up one of the residency programs for OEM. And then we have Dr. Grimes. That is a public health service uniform. It looks like Navy, but it's actually the public health service. And he works at NIOSH, works a lot on evaluating hazards in the workplace. And at NIOSH, they're not looking at a specific workplace. They're looking at kind of the bigger research picture of all the kinds of hazards, and they provide guidance to the field. OSHA uses the research coming out of NIOSH to develop the regulations that they then apply to the workplace. Dr. Heimel, Pamela Heimel, is the one I mentioned earlier, CMO of Walt Disney Parks and Resorts. You'll see she's dual board certified in occupational medicine and internal medicine. As was mentioned in my introduction, I am also board certified in both family medicine and occupational environmental medicine. There's a lot of our specialists who have another specialty. Either they were there first or they added it later to kind of widen their scope into the kind of things they can address. I'm kind of jealous of Dr. Heimel. I think her job just sounds like a lot of fun. Being around the Disney atmosphere, she's responsible for, I think it's over 100,000 employees worldwide. Very big breadth and locations around the world. So it's really kind of a unique job, but there's other very similar ones. There's sports teams that you can work with and just all sorts of really fun things you can do outside of the pure clinical OEM that we think about. Dr. Kusser, I believe his name is pronounced, is actually a psychiatrist and an OcDoc. So he works at Mayo Clinic and does a lot with occupational behavioral health and in the employee assistance program at Mayo, supporting employees as they work through all of the stresses of being a healthcare worker and so forth. Dr. Cook-Shemanek is associated with government. She is in Montana in the Department of Labor and Industry. There's in many, if not most, state levels, there's a OEM physician that works in the Department of Labor. I know the gentleman who works in Colorado does a very similar kind of job. So they're doing kind of the state regulatory oversight of workers' comp and other issues related to how the state interacts with all of the employers around that state. And Dr. Taiwo is at 3M. So this is very much a corporate kind of practice. He's a vice president of the corporation and chief medical officer. And oversees not only the care of employees, but is involved in their benefits programs and other the health and wellness kind of programs for their 3M employees. And again, that's another very large worldwide footprint kind of employer that he gets to work with. Dr. Bourgeois is down in Louisiana. He is in a private practice under his own name, former president of our professional organization. Does a lot of consulting work. As you can see, he's done some work with SeaWorld, Walt Disney, a number of medical legal projects. And Dr. Morris is in Washington State and does a lot of focus on underserved populations, as well as residency training, both in neurosurgery and OEM. Dr. Isakara is a friend of mine. She's at University of California, San Diego, UCSD. Similar job to me in the university setting. Her big focus, though, is informatics. So she's working hard. I don't know if any of you have heard of the EPIC electronic medical record system. She's trying to, EPIC was designed for not for OEM, which has special needs in our software systems. She's working hard with EPIC to try and develop subsets that will serve our specialty much more. So she's very involved in the informatics of our specialty. So who do we work with as OEM professionals? We interact a lot with medical specialists. So we might see an injury in our clinic and realize there's a potential for a higher level of care needed. So we'll refer to orthopedics. A lot of our musculoskeletal injuries will also refer to physical therapists or occupational therapists to kind of help them recover. We interact with mental health a lot as specialists. Primary care will interact with them to support them as they take care of workers, but we'll also receive referrals from them. So they may have an injured worker who is near the end of medical care and they need help figuring out how to get them back to work. So they'll consult us to do what in our practice we call it workability. How can we get this person back to work and being a functional part of society? We interact with business and management. I'm actually aligned under the HR system, human resources system in Dartmouth Health. That's my boss is the chief of HR. And so we interact a lot with HR, helping them oversee the employee programs. If you're in a corporate setting, you're going to be part of the executive leadership. A lot of interaction with insurance. As the medical director of the employer for the employer's employee health, I interact a lot with our workers' comp insurance carrier, advising, kind of giving medical advice on cases and collaborating with them to kind of get the best outcomes for both the worker as well as the employer. A lot of legal work. Much of the work we do is looked closely at either by lawyers or regulatory organizations. Interactions with OSHA. Americans with Disabilities Act is a huge player in our world with thinking about accommodations for people with disabilities or permanent injuries. If you're in a industrial setting, you will definitely interact with industrial hygienists who will kind of be the boots on the ground, kind of assessing workers' risks, and then come to you with the medical questions related to that. Ergonomics is another big one. Even in a healthcare setting, one of our biggest injury areas is lifting. Lifting patients, helping them move, getting them to the bathroom. Nursing is actually one of the highest risk in the broad category of nursing, not a specific kind, but the broad category of nursing is one of the highest risk work areas across all industries because of that patient interaction and the risk associated with that. There's a lot of research and development going into automated ways to help patients move around, get out of bed, get to the bathroom, but there still is a heavy dependency on the human factor there. And so our nursing staff, the nurses and nursing assistants and such, place themselves at significant risk for the musculoskeletal injuries. I mentioned the public health. Working with the epidemiological epi-trends. I interact with our state health department. For example, when we had a measles, an adult measles case show up at our ER, my focus was on all of our employees that were exposed, but I was also interacting with the state health department to make sure they were aware of exposure cases so they could track it at the larger picture across the state. So there is some opportunities for those kind of interactions. And I already mentioned government, both federal, state, as well as local policymakers. You can work as part of a government organization or interact influencing policy. As I said, I was invited just this last year to serve on a state commission, a commission that was set up by the state legislature to look at the topic of climate health and long-term health issues. Excuse me. So a little history of OEM. The risk of workers and the associated health concerns were identified as far back as Hippocrates, 400 BC. He identified that miners had some kind of illnesses that appeared to be associated with lead. I don't know that he had enough information to say it was lead poisoning, but he understood that there was an associated risk there. And then Bernardino Ramazzini published the first textbook of occupational diseases. And that Latin there, which I'm not going to try and pronounce it, I believe translates as diseases of workers. So that became our first textbook, and he's often referred to as our godfather of OEM, or the father of OEM, because of that textbook. I mentioned Alice Hamilton earlier. She was a very famous researcher, physician researcher in early 1900s, and she had a big focus on the social justice and how workers were treated, and so her work and her research was very prominent in the development of the workers' compensation system. I won't go into detail, but prior to workers' comp laws, if a worker got injured, they were on their own to try and get any benefits from the company. They just were completely on their own. Workers' comp is kind of a no-fault way to say, okay, they've been injured at work. let's take care of them. The employer has to pay into an insurance fund that then provides care for that worker injury. Alice Hamilton is also widely famous for being the first female faculty member at Harvard University. So why would you want to do a career in OEM? I've kind of touched on the breadth of things, the variety of things that we can do, but there's also just kind of what I call a lifestyle aspect to it. Both of these graphs are reflecting burnout rates of various specialties. And basically, take your eyes down to the very bottom of both those graphs, and you'll see preventive medicine and occupational medicine way down there at the bottom. The burnout rate is lower than any other specialty in this graph. And that's true. I mean, I experienced that. And in most situations, OEM is an 8 to 5 kind of office hour specialty. We may get phone calls or, do something like this on the weekend, consult on the weekend, but we're not spending hours at the hospital. And it's not that those things aren't stimulating. If that's what you love, then you should definitely pursue that. But when you're thinking about, okay, I want to have a family, I want to have a lifestyle, OEM is a great practice for that. These two graphs are similar, but they're talking about work-life balance. The chart on the left is comparing burnout with satisfaction. And if you look way up in the upper left-hand corner, there's occupational medicine up there with high satisfaction and low burnout. And then the graph on the right is an inverse of the other Mayo Clinic proceedings graph, again, showing satisfaction. So it's a great career. It's a lot of fun. I thoroughly enjoy it. Like I said, I did ER during my training. I've done the primary care clinical, and I enjoyed that stuff. But I really have fun in my job trying to work through all as I talked about, the cognitive challenges of thinking about workers and caring for them. So kind of in summary, like I said, there's a variety of practice settings I've referred to. There's a high demand for OEM physicians. Every large corporation knows they need an expert to kind of advise them on how to take care of their workers. The ACOM, our professional organization that I'll talk about in a second, has a job listing program within their website. And at any given time, you can open that and find at least 50 different job postings. They're not all perfect jobs for each and every person, but at least there's opportunities out there. So there's a lot of opportunities for OEM physicians and a lot of opportunity for leadership because of our breadth of experience. Part of our training and part of our board certification, it's one of the few specialties where part of our board questions will be on laws. What are the regulations? What are the laws overseeing what we do? So we have a good sense of regulatory and oversight concepts, which puts us in a good position to be leaders in whatever setting we're in. And then looking at compensation, that's always, we don't like our paycheck to be the main reason we go into a specialty, but it's always nice to know that you're going to get paid well. I think that $725,000 for a corporate medical director is very much an outlier. It probably is truth, but it's an outlier. You'll see that the vast majority are getting paid somewhere between $250 and $300 range. A few will be a little bit higher than that, and some will be a little bit lower. But that's all good income. I mean, that's a income that will certainly take care of you and your family. And with a lifestyle where you're not doing on-call and long hours on weekends, it's kind of a really nice balance to have a life. So getting to OEM, as of this year, OEM is now in the residency match program. Previously, it was all independent of that, and you had to apply separately. But now, when you get through to your third year of medical school, you're going to have to start the process of applying to the specialty you want. So you'll go through this match system where you put your application in. It's very complex. I'm not going to do a lot of detail there. This chart shows 23 active programs. I think we're down to 19. I think a couple of these have closed. Most of these programs have 1 or 2 slots a year. I believe Harvard has a few more than that. And what they do is they ask you to take your first year of residency anywhere you want as purely a clinical rotation year. Kind of like just learn the basic clinical skills through several different specialties. And so what most of these do is you apply at one time for 2 things. That 1 year of clinical, and then immediately after you'll go to the OEM residency. So you'll do all of that, apply for both of those at the same time. And if you get accepted to OEM, then you know you'll go to the clinical. There's one, I believe it's the Loma Linda, I'm not sure about that, that actually includes that clinical year as part of its 3-year program, but that's the exception. All of them will give, as part of that 2-year OEM training, you will earn either a Master's of Public Health or an equivalent master's degree. There's Masters of Science and Public Health, and there's a couple of others, but you'll earn something like that as part of your residency program. That master's degree is a requirement of the board certification. So you have to have the master's degree along with passing the tests and so on. In each other residencies, there's opportunities for rotation. So you're not just sitting at your one teaching site for 2 years. You will actually go to different places. You'll go to corporations and be under a preceptor and learn for a few weeks here. You'll go to other settings. So a lot of opportunities there. And then we do have our organization, ACOM, has a national meeting every year called AOHC, the American Occupational Health Conference, that moves around the country. There's opportunities for student scholarships there as a medical student. So an opportunity maybe to travel to a national meeting and kind of see the practice of OEM in a larger picture, meet a lot of the different characters. ACOM is our professional organization, American College of Occupational and Environmental Medicine. It's our professional society that promotes the optimal health and safety of workers, workplaces, and environments. Provides a lot of education opportunities. Once you're a physician, you have to have CME, continuing medical education, a certain amount each year, and ACOM is one of our primary sources in our specialty. There's also regional versions of that. I participate in the New England College of Occupational Environmental Medicine. And there's one of those for each of the major regions of the U.S. And there can be even other local organizations. Another big product of ACOM is a publication called MD Guidelines. This is a set of evidence-based treatment guidelines that help you with the work injury and work illness related stuff. And it'll give you ideas of like, what's the average time someone is off work because of an injury. It will take into account complicating factors such as diabetes, obesity, smoking. And it kind of gives you a way to say, here's standard of care, what we expect. And then we have to figure out where this patient's going to lie. Or hopefully we have kind of helps you set a goal of getting someone recovered. There's another set of guidelines out there called ODG. I think it's the Official Disability Guidelines. Those guidelines, as I understand it, are actually developed by the insurance industry, which means it's all about money. It's based on actual costs. This is based on clinical evidence. And so it's very useful for us as clinicians when we're working with the injured workers to like I said, target where we're trying to get people back to work. The nice thing about ACOM, it is a free membership for medical students. There's a QR code there you can scan, and that'll be on the next page as well. I did test that QR code earlier this morning. It does work. It takes you directly to a web page where you can enter your demographic information and get your name on our membership list. And here's kind of the benefits of ACOM, that we have a peer-reviewed journal called the Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine that you'll have access to as a member. I already mentioned the MD guidelines as free electronic access as a member, so you can see the evidence-based treatment guidelines, as well as the networking educational opportunities already mentioned, both local and national. So this is the information on ACOM, Twitter, Facebook, and so on. And then I also wanted to share, I'm just going to pull this up here. This website here, aoec.org/OEM, and this is the link named out, the Occupational Environmental Medicine information page, is a website set up just with, it's everything I've talked about, but in a lot more detail. Just a lot of links on there that kind of, it talks about applying the residency, how to get in there if you had a previous specialty, all these practice aspects of our specialty. So it's a nice page to go to and get an overview of all this information. So that is the information I had for today, and I am open to questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cockrum. That was an amazing and informative session. I really appreciate you sharing like the other physicians' profiles as well. That really gave me a really broad view and broad scope of how like really diverse this field is. So we are going to be conducting our Q&A session now. Let me share that slide. Okay. While that loads, I compiled a couple of questions, yes, about Dr. Cockrum's path specifically. I was curious to know a little bit more, actually, about what inspired you to go from family medicine, or did you do family medicine first and then occupational medicine, and what inspired you to do that?
So yeah, I was a family physician first. I did my family practice residency at John Peter Smith in Fort Worth, Texas. Um, I did not do a military scholarship for medical school. Most intelligent people do. I didn't. My father had been in the military, and I thought, well, I'm done with my military service. But then I started looking at the layout of family practice. Our specialty was is really focused on the family practice, our training program is very focused on putting out family docs into rural medicine. And I just didn't see, I was single at the time. I didn't see a really good fit for me. And then the recruiter got to me. So I joined the Air Force and I did 2 assignments as a family doc. So I did 2 years at Yokota Air Base in Japan and then 2 years at a small base in England, Croupton Air Base. But I knew all along because my father, as I said, was in the Air Force and he was a pilot. And I couldn't become a pilot because my eyesight was too bad, but I knew I kind of wanted to be connected to that world, the flight world of the Air Force flying. And so the specialty is called flight medicine. And like I said, it's not a residency specialty initially. It's just a 6-week course. They kind of teach you the basics of aviation, altitude medicine, and so on. And so I was drawn to that. I love the military, I love the Air Force. This put me really into what I call the operational side. So it's family practice. I was in the clinic taking care of members, family members, so on. But as a flight doc, I had this very small defined population. A lot of flight docs are actually placed directly into the operational unit. So instead of being part of the clinic on base, or actually part of the operational unit, really, I mean, day to day interacting with them, taking care of them. And I had a lot of fun doing that. So then as a flight doc, I had that opportunity to apply to the Air Force specialty aerospace medicine residency, the RAM I mentioned. And that's what really got me. Hadn't even thought about occupational medicine until I was doing that residency. And the way ours was structured at the time, is you did the MPH, you did aerospace second year. And the third year, you could do either occupational medicine or general preventive. And I just felt like there was going to be more post-military career opportunities, occupational medicine. So that's the route I went and have not regretted it. Like I said, I thoroughly enjoy the cognitive challenge and the diversity of things we do in the OEM world.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Cockrum. That was very inspiring. And what does your typical day as an occupational medicine physician look like?
So very highly variable depending on what kind of practice setting you're in. I am a medical director, and so my role is a significant portion is administrative. So I do spend a lot of time on my computer, working on our programs, making sure they're as functional as they can be. When I'm in clinic, we will see work injuries in our health system. So I mentioned the nursing staff who might have a back injury or a knee injury while lifting a patient. We have people who slip and fall in the parking lot coming into work. We get a lot of needle sticks, which are accidents where someone's trying to put a needle in a patient and somehow something slips up and the needle goes into the person. So we have what's called a bloodborne pathogen exposure. We take care of a lot of those in our clinic. And a lot of that's done by we have a nursing staff in our occupational medicine clinic that does a lot of that interface. And then the actual patient care will be those injuries. I do a number of consults, as I've talked about, people with exposure issues. My staff physician yesterday saw somebody who had a 10-year career working with spray foam, which has isocyanates in it. And he was now symptomatic. And, we talked through the case and we actually think there could be something more like cancer going on, but he does have an exposure that could be purely occupational. So we need to work up his case and find out what's going on. Is it cancer, in which case he needs that treatment. And then we have to do what's called causality, which is a special legal area where we as clinicians tell the legal world, the insurance world, yes, we really do think this is from work, or we think it may not be from work. I also do some specialty consults called permanent impairment rating, PIR. So this is after someone has been injured or ill and they have gone through the healthcare system and they've maxed out the care. I mean, they've done all the appropriate specialties, all the appropriate treatments, and they're at their best they're going to get. The way I explain it to patients is, here's where you are pre-injury. What we want to do with our care is get you back to that same level, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you only get up to here. So there's a loss of function there between the pre-injury and where you are now. And when we can't get you any better, we call that MMI, maximal medical improvement. And once we say you're at MMI, then we have to assess what's that difference. And so that difference is through a complex evaluation and calculation system called the permanent impairment rating. I do a few of those, probably about one every 3 months. It's a lot of work, takes a lot of hours to do those because, again, it's a highly legalized document that I have to be very careful about how I word, but it's also very fascinating to do those.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Cockrum. That really, that actually is a perfect segue to our next question about the most rewarding case you've had, or situation that you've handled in your career, or maybe you can also talk about what is the most rewarding part about your work in occupational medicine.
The most rewarding for me is when I can help an injured patient get back to their previous career, but get back to their previous job fully functional. It's happened some, usually if those are the more minor injuries. I've dealt with some patients who've had life-altering injuries. Unfortunately, they were still satisfying as a clinician because I worked with this one young lady. She was working at a regional, what we call a regional center. So it was kind of like a psych slash, not a penitentiary, but they put violent type, risky behavior people there. And so she was dealing with a resident there and injured her shoulder. And, it started out looking like a standard shoulder injury, and it ended up as a long-term condition called CRPS or CRIPS, depending on where you're at and what you call it, chronic regional pain syndrome. Which took her, she could not do that job anymore, but we were able to get her into another job that was more sedentary. She didn't have to use that right arm as much, and we were able to help manage pain. It took a long time, about 2.5 years. But when I left Nebraska, she was at a point where she had a new career, she was stable, she had reached MMI. So it was satisfying in the sense that I was able to work with her through that entire process. Obviously couldn't get her back to her pre-injury standpoint. But she was an enjoyable patient to work with. We don't do the breadth of primary care where you take care of someone from cradle to grave with every medical condition they have, but we can, in cases, do this long-term care focused on this one injury. And I've had a few of those patients, and I enjoy it, even though we don't get the outcomes we want. Just the long-term interactions and relationships are very enjoyable.
Thank you. And you're mentioning, and that's very interesting that you can still have that long-term care and that long-term relationship with your patients.
Right.
But speaking of patients, let's say patients are not able to return back to work at baseline as they were before their injury. How do you address maybe their burnout or any workplace stress in employees like these?
Yeah, so the returning to work after an injury, there's always a lot more than just the injured part of their body and what do they do. At the base of it is what we want to know what their job functions are. And then we assess the injury and what portions of their job functions can they do and what things should they avoid. We try to avoid telling the employer exactly which job to do. So if the individual works day shift or works night shift and doesn't want to work night shift because of their injury, we really don't tell the employer that. We don't say, put this person on this shift. And what we say is, this person must get 8 hours a night of sleep. If that's actually a reason, I'm kind of making that up. But, we tell the employer that functional activities a person should avoid to allow healing and to avoid other injuries. So if their job involves a lot of lifting and they have a back injury, we'll say no lifting or lifting very low levels, no repetitive squatting. The employer then has to decide, can this person work in an alternate job? Can they do their primary job, but they can do what's called accommodation and find ways to work around those restrictions? And then dealing with, you mentioned the job stress, the return to work, there is a whole area of study. And actually, there's one of my close peers is on this session, Marion Cloran, and she knows more about this than I do. But the relationship that a worker has with their employer before the injury can play a very major role in that employee's desire to go back to work. Because if they have a negative, stressful workplace, trying to get them to get better and get back to work can be a bit of a challenge at times. And you just have to deal with those as best you can. Some states will allow you to refer that worker to mental health care, where they can do more of a, work directly with that person's mental health and mental perceptions of their injury and of their job. Some states don't support that, so you have to kind of deal with whatever. One of the interesting things about workers' comp is every state has its own workers' comp system and its own laws. And so from one state to another can be very, very different. So you have to work with that. Where I work is in New Hampshire, but we're right on the border with Vermont. And so a lot of our employees are in Vermont, and we see referrals from Vermont workers, the employers in Vermont. So we kind of deal with two workers' comp systems there that are a little bit different. I'm not sure that addresses in full what the question was, but I don't know if Dr. Cloran, if you want to add anything about the workplace stress and return to work.
No, I have my own session coming up.
Okay. Well, now you have a topic to take to your own session.
But no, actually, one thing to add, I think that like in all specialties, knowing how to communicate with patients is really, critical. And in ours, because often we don't have the typical kind of primary care continuous continuity relationship. And sometimes when patients come to us, it's under duress, or it's under circumstances. They had a work injury, they may be upset. The need to communicate really well with patients is just a huge, usually important skill and competency for occupational medicine.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I mentioned Dr. Thorin because when I came out of the military, I was new to the workers' comp system, and I went to a training session, and she was one of the instructors talking about these sort of mental aspects to injury. So she's been one of my mentors in that area. So, and she just happens to be listening in today. So.
I appreciate the shout out.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cloran and Dr. Cockrum. That was very helpful. We just received another question about workers' compensation, primarily about workers' compensation insurance benefits. We went over that in previous sessions, but this question specifically is asking if a patient has an injury, like basically in Maryland, we just had a lot of snow. So if a patient has an injury at a parking space or at the doctor's office, how would I don't think this would work. Workers' compensation would apply. I think it only applies if they were sent by their employer to go, something like that, or they're there for like a medical fitness evaluation. I'm not sure if you know. This is a very specific question, so let me know.
Yeah, I kind of think I know what they're asking. In most states, as I understand it, and when I was in the Air Force, we did have a civilian population working with the Air Force, and so I kind of knew the federal workers' comp system. Workers' comp will cover from the time you get out of your vehicle at the parking lot of your workplace and until you get back into your vehicle. If you're kind of following the sidewalk. And what I mean there is we had someone actually at our facility, it was snowy and icy out, and the sidewalks had been scraped and salted, and this person decided to go down a grassy hill and slipped and fell. So the insurance company said, we're not covering that because they had the opportunity to follow the sidewalk, which had been prepped for them, and they chose to go off land. So there's some gray areas there. You mentioned though, if your employer has sent you somewhere, said you will get in your car and you will drive here and do this and drive back, that entire time is now covered by that company. So people who travel for their job will be covered during travel as well as at the other location, even if it's not owned by the employer. And I've seen cases of our employees who were at a conference in a different state, and they had an incident at the hotel, tripped over some construction that was not clearly marked. So that was a work injury. Now the insurance company will investigate the site and they'll try and recoup money from like the hotel where the injury happened. But for our function, our purposes, that was a work injury and they were covered by the workers' comp system. So there can be some gray areas there. But if you're doing something that's directly tied to your employer's needs and demands, then you should be covered.
Thank you, Dr. Cockrum. I know that was more of a law-related question. And Dr. Cloran also mentioned in the chat that the doctor doesn't need to decide if the injury is covered. The system does. So the doctor just needs to document the circumstances. Thank you so much. So one more question we had was about legal and regulatory aspects. Like, how do you stay up to date or updated on changing regulations in occupational health and safety?
I mentioned that ACOM is a major source of education for our specialty, and that's one of the primary sources. So ACOM, as well as our regional subsets of ACOM, ours is NECOM, where I'm at in New England. I was just down, I saw Dr. Cloran just a few weeks ago at the Mid-Atlantic Region College, so MARCOM. So we will have educational sessions. We'll do it over a couple of days, and we'll invite specialists. And so if we know that there's changes in regulatory stuff, we'll bring in an expert on that. It might be someone, a doc who works in that regulatory agency, or it might be someone who has direct experience. There's one of our very famous members, Natalie Hartenbaum, who is really considered the national expert on DOT driving examinations, certification exams for drivers. So anytime where those rules change, people will invite Dr. Hartenbaum to do a presentation at their conference, and every year at our AOHC, she does an update on the latest rules and regulations that impact that, which is that's a major area for OEM is doing those certification exams. So it's through each other, our network, we develop the educational opportunities. We also ACOM will host webinars through the year. And again, we'll bring in experts from various areas to try and catch everybody up on new regulations.
Thank you, Dr. Cockrum. And one more question we had, this is a similar question we asked in previous sessions about how you envision the role of occupational medicine evolving in the next few years.
We've had a lot of discussion about how AI is going to be incorporated into the practice of medicine. And I think there's also going to be an aspect of how AI impacts our employees, how it's being used in the workplace. Automation in the workplace is going to change the risks to our workers that we'll have to figure out. Everybody's concerned about losing jobs because of automation, but when you have automation, you now have to have jobs to take care of the automation. And so there's going to be a kind of a different set of risks and issues there based on that. It's hard to say real specifically, and there's a changing legal environment. I think there's going to be some significant legal regulatory changes over the next year or two with a different administration in place. So we'll have to pay attention to that and see how it impacts the health of our workers based on changes in regulations.
So especially with the rise of AI and also telework, what are some unique challenges in protecting the health of remote or hybrid workers? I believe, they're sitting all day, they have more sedentary lifestyles. What has been your experience there?
It is a challenging area. The biggest issue if they're sedentary at home is the ergonomics. Most employers will provide a budget to a remote worker, as I understand it, to a certain amount to say, here's how you set up your office, and we'll buy you the supplies you need. And if you end up presenting with symptoms that suggest maybe like a carpal tunnel syndrome from the typing, they can get you a new keyboard, or some will even invest in a sit-stand desk kind of situation. One of the areas we deal with that we think about, because even in healthcare, we have a lot of remote workers, people doing administrative work.
Mm-hmm.
Our director, our vice president of benefits, lives in Nashville, Tennessee. So, it's spread all over the country. The challenge there becomes doing what we need to do to take care of them, but we're not licensed in the state where that person is. So even though the employer's in New Hampshire, that person is, she's in Tennessee. And if I have to provide work-related care to her, we have to be very careful about the licensing rules, because I'm not licensed in Tennessee. And that's one of the biggest challenges we're working through right now, is how do we do that? Our EAP specialist, we have a psychologist in our EAP here at Dartmouth Health, and she's struggling with, when we have a remote worker who out of state who is accessing the EAP, which is a benefit of theirs, and they're seeking care through the EAP, is there a licensing issue to providing that care? I don't know the answer to that, but that's kind of the issues we deal with remote workers.
Thank you. And I believe you also mentioned that you worked at the New Hampshire State Legislature on the long-term effects of climate change. Is that correct?
So I'm the representative of the New Hampshire Hospital Association to the New Hampshire's Commission on long-term effects of climate change. So it's a commission there's a couple of representatives on there. There's one or two physicians representing different specialty organizations. I was just asked to kind of represent the hospital association for New Hampshire on this committee. And I just started a couple of months ago, so I'm still kind of learning all the things they're looking at. But mostly they're listening to professional presentations and then making recommendations for possible future legislation back to the legislature.
That's amazing. I shadowed the Maryland Hospital Association on a lot of these issues, but climate change never really came up. So I'm really
Right.
glad that you're there representing. What got you interested in climate change, and how does climate change affect the health of patients? We wouldn't really, I would say most people wouldn't really make that connection, like climate health and change. How does it affect humans if it's just the climate and the earth?
Yeah, that's an hour present, at least an hour
I
presentation by itself. It's a very complex area. At its simplest, is the weather's changing. We're having a lot more concerns about heat injuries for those who work outside. And it's snowing outside here today. So, whether that's related to climate change or just the natural climate, you worry about the injuries from ice on the roadways and sidewalks and stuff. So it's a very big area to consider. I'm not an expert in that area. I just started focusing on this when I was asked to serve on this commission. So it's an area where I'm trying to do a lot of reading and working. And looks like Dr. Corns put some comments in about what's he say there? Wildlife smoke and particulate pollution, which is a very big deal in California right now. Absolutely, I totally agree with that statement.
Yes. Thank you so much. We had a recent session on in my medical school for an elective I'm taking on climate change and health, and that was a 2 hour and 2.5 hour session. So I
Yeah.
completely agree with you. I know that was a bit of a big question, but thank you for summarizing. That was a good way to also explain that. I know some people don't really make that connection, and I didn't either until this session that I had for two and a half
Right.
hours long. So. We also received this question from a pre-med student. What advice would you give them considering a career in occupational medicine? Of course, as a pre-med, you have to still, take their MCAT, go into medical school, finish your clerkships, rotations, and then match your residency. What advice do you have for them to starting on this journey?
So yeah, if you're interested in OEM, even at the pre-med level, start looking for those shadowing opportunities. Obviously, this is one, but applying to medical school has changed since when I did a million years ago. There's a big emphasis on exposure to healthcare, so they want to make sure that you understand kind of what you're getting into. Find an OEM physician in your area and say, "Can I just shadow?" As a non-medical, a pre-medical student, you may not be able to see everything. You may not be able to actually interact with patients, but you can at least see what they do in their practice, understand some of the things. Excuse me. I talked about my role as medical director. I spend a lot of my time in meetings, kind of high level hospital management meetings of a lot of safety programs, patient safety, a lot of different areas. And so other residents in our hospital that do rotate with us, I will often assign them to attend those meetings just so they learn all of the areas where an OEM physician might have a kind of a part to play in the bigger picture management. So that even if it's sitting through a meeting, you can learn a little bit just by understanding the role that an OEM physician can play. So it's just looking for those opportunities, those shadowing kind of things. I think is probably the best opportunity. And then when you're in medical school, you'll have some opportunities for elective rotations. And I would definitely take those. I think funding may be a question mark in there, and I don't know how that works, but if you can get someplace like I know Dr. Clorens at Maryland School of Medicine, great opportunity to kind of hang over the shoulders of some really great experts learning about the specialty there.
Thank you. I feel like this organization, ACOM, it sounds like an amazing organization. I've never heard of an organization that also gives you access to like their journal and to kind of nerd out about it. I know that was the first that really like, enticed me. So I'm going to join that as well today.
Great.
So I really appreciate your time and coming in today for mentoring us. Really appreciate it. I would like to ask everyone to please give a warm thank you to Dr. Cockrum in the chat box for this wonderfully informative session. I learned a lot today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to be conducting our closing session with our quiz and future session dates. So the link to this quiz for today's session is now live with Dr. Cockrum. You'll need a 70% or higher to pass and receive certification as always. And we will be having our next session actually on Friday, January 17th at 11 a.m. EST. And as always, all of the future sessions are on our website. So stay excited for Occupational Medicine Month. I know I am. I was not as excited about it until, I'm learning so much and really enjoying it. It's not something that even medical students have much access to. So I've been also sharing it with a lot of classmates from other medical schools, and they found it very, very informative, engaging, and informational. So really appreciate your time, Dr. Cockrum, again, and wishing all the students the best. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hope to see you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.